My own brother stood before our parents and claimed I had abused him throughout our childhood. They believed him instantly, without asking me a single question. That night, I walked out of the house, severed every tie with all three of them, and went on to build a life so extraordinary that my success became the cruelest punishment they would ever receive. Let me be upfront before we continue. I am not writing this from a place of pain. I am not angry. I am not broken. And I do not need anyone's pity. My name is Callan Vey. I am 34. I run a security and infrastructure risk consulting firm. We have government contracts, international clients, and more work than we can staff for. That is the present. Now, let me take you back to where it actually starts. My parents Aldous and Petra built Vey Infrastructure Group over 30 years. Civil contracting, project management, regional government tenders. It was a real business, not flashy, not famous, but serious. Multi-million-dollar operations, long-term contracts, a decent reputation in the industry. Aldous was the face. Petra managed the interior of everything, suppliers, relationships, the unspoken politics of a family-run firm. I joined at 22, fresh out of university with a degree in civil project management. I did the unglamorous work, supplier negotiations, process modernization, financial restructuring. In year 3, the company nearly collapsed because all this over-leveraged on a government tender we almost lost. I spent 4 months fixing it, renegotiating timelines, cutting costs, personally calling 3 key suppliers to keep them from walking. We survived. Aldous got a handshake from the board. I got a quiet nod and moved on. That was the shape of things between us. I understood it. I accepted it. My younger brother, Riven, was 5 years behind me and built completely differently. Charming, socially smooth, easy to be around. His title was Client Relations Director. His actual function was showing up to events, keeping all this entertained, and making the firm feel approachable to people who would never look at a balance sheet. I never resented him for that. Different people, different roles. I thought we were fine. I thought a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. The dinner invitation came on a Tuesday, framed as a quarterly review, which was not unusual. I drove 45 minutes with a folder of updated financial projections sitting on my passenger seat. I was planning to walk Aldous through a revised supplier framework I had been building for 3 weeks. I noticed something the moment I walked into the dining room. The table was not set for a business discussion. No papers, no chairs pulled out for a working meeting. Aldous was seated but would not hold eye contact when I came in. Petra's expression was already fixed into something I could not quite read. Not grief, not anger, something more deliberate than either. And Riven was standing near the window on the far side of the room, positioned like someone had told him to stand there. I did not say anything. I set my folder down and waited. Riven started talking. It was a prepared speech. I recognized the architecture of it immediately. The pacing, the emotional calibration, the way he moved between specific and vague with practiced precision. He described years of psychological control, intimidation at home, humiliation at work, a childhood spent afraid of me. He cited ages, rooms, specific incidents. Here is what made it genuinely unsettling. The skeleton was real. He was using actual events, real arguments, real moments from our history, and wrapping them in an interpretation that turned them into something else entirely. It was not pure invention. It was reconstruction. And reconstruction, done carefully, is harder to fight than a flat lie. I waited for one of my parents to turn to me to say, "Callan, do you want to respond? Is this accurate? Give us your side." Aldous spoke first. "We think it is better for the family if you step back from the company." That was it. That was the entire trial. No question. No pause for my response. Petra said nothing. She reached over and put her hand on Riven's arm. I picked up my folder. I walked toward the hallway, and that is when I saw it half tucked under the corner of a sofa cushion. A small notepad, Riven's handwriting, bullet points running down the page. The fourth one read, "Stay emotional. Do not get defensive." This was not a family conversation. It was a production. And everyone in that room except me had a copy of the script. I did not touch the notepad. I looked at it for maybe 3 seconds, long enough to confirm what I was seeing, short enough that nobody in the room could register a reaction on my face. Then I straightened up, pulled my jacket, and looked back across the room at my parents and my brother standing in their triangle formation like a rehearsed last scene. I said one word, "All right." Not fine. Not "you will regret this." Not a single syllable of the defense I could have launched because I had one. I had a real one. 6 years of documented work, 3 operational rescues, my name on contracts that kept this company breathing. I could have made noise. I chose not to. Not because I was being graceful, because the moment I started arguing, I became a character inside their story. The volatile one, the unstable one, the one who could not handle being held accountable. I picked up my folder and walked out of that house. I did not drive home. I sat in my car for about 90 seconds at the end of their driveway and ran a single calculation. How long before Riven, now feeling confident, moves to lock me out of company systems? He is not technically sophisticated. He would need to call someone. That call would not happen tonight. They would want to let the dust settle, maybe wait until morning to make it feel less reactive. I had a window. The VE infrastructure office was 31 minutes away. My access card still worked at the front door. I signed myself into the building log. I was not hiding anything and went straight to the accounting archive room on the second floor. I want to be clear about something. I went in looking for documentation to protect myself, not to find ammunition. I needed records with my name on them, contracts I had signed, approvals I had authorized, financial decisions that had my fingerprints on them. If I was being set up as the exit strategy for whatever problems this company had accumulated, I needed to understand the landscape before someone else got to define it for me. What I found over the next 4 hours was considerably worse than I anticipated. There were 2 sets of books, not metaphorically, literally, a clean external record, the one auditors saw, the one filed with regulators, and a parallel internal document trail that told a completely different story. I am not an accountant, but I spent 6 years inside this company's financial operation. I knew how the numbers were supposed to flow. These did not. 7-figure loans drawn against company assets. Several of the authorization documents carried my signature. I stared at those for a long time. My signature on approvals I had never seen for transactions I had never sanctioned. Forged cleanly, carefully by someone who had access to enough of my actual paperwork to replicate the mechanics of how I signed my name. There was more. A network of payments routing to supplier entities that with minimal cross-referencing traced back to accounts all personally controlled. Contract values inflated by 20 to 35% across 3 major projects over 4 years, with the surplus disappearing before it reached the official balance sheet. Tax filings that consistently reported revenue figures I recognized as structurally low. 3 suppliers sitting on payment commitments this company had made with no realistic intention of honoring. I photographed everything. 2 encrypted drives, systematic, not frantic. I was not panicking. Panic is what happens when you do not understand what you are looking at. I understood this completely. I was pulling the last folder from the physical archive, a hanging file near the back of the second drawer, mislabeled as a decommissioned vendor contract, when I found a document that reframed the entire night. It was an internal agreement. 2 signatures at the bottom. Aldous VE Riven dated 8 months ago. The language was careful but clear. A formal transfer of operational control of VE Infrastructure Group to Riven, effective upon satisfactory resolution of Kalen VE's involvement with the company 8 months ago. The dinner was not a decision they made because of what Riven told them. The dinner was the last step of a process that had already been completed, signed, and filed away while I was still showing up every day and believing I was building something. I sat in that room for a long time before I stood up. Then I took the document, photographed it twice, added it to both drives, and walked out of the building for the last time. I rented a room in a city 2 hours away, and paid 3 months up front in cash, not because I was running. I want to be precise about that. I had no legal exposure. I had not done anything wrong, and the documents I had copied from an archive I had legitimate access to were not stolen. I paid cash and kept a low profile because I needed thinking space that nobody could interrupt. No calls from Aldous trying to manage the situation. No Petra showing up at my door with a version of events she had rehearsed with Riven. No former colleagues navigating their awkward position between loyalty and self-preservation. Just a room, a laptop, and 2 encrypted drives sitting on a desk I bought secondhand. The first 3 months, I did not build anything. I studied. I went through every document on those drives until I understood the fraud better than the people who had constructed it. Not at a surface level, at a structural level. I mapped the shell payment network, traced the forged authorization chain, cross-referenced the inflated contract values against publicly available tender records to understand exactly how much had been skimmed and over what timeline. I built a complete picture. Here is why that mattered. I needed to know what was going to collapse and approximately when, so I could make sure I was nowhere near it when it did. A structurally fraudulent company carrying that volume of hidden liability, now being managed by someone with Riven's financial literacy, was not a long-term going concern. The question was not if, it was sequencing. Suppliers would move first, then a tax audit, then the larger creditors once the default started showing up in public filings. I estimated 4 to 6 years before the full weight of it became visible. I was off by about 8 months, but the shape of it was accurate. While I was studying the collapse I just walked away from, I was also building the thing I was going to walk toward. I have been mentally constructing the concept for 2 years before the dinner. Security and infrastructure risk consulting specifically at the institutional level. Government facility vulnerability assessment, critical infrastructure protection frameworks, the kind of work that requires someone who understands how large civil and infrastructure projects are designed and built, because that is the only way to understand how they can be compromised. 6 years inside VE infrastructure had given me exactly that foundation. I knew supply chains, construction sequencing, project accountability gaps, the points in a major infrastructure build where oversight goes thin. I registered the company under the name EOM Group. Clean, non-referential, Nothing that traced back to anything. At that stage, I was also operating professionally under a contracted name while I rebuilt my credentials and network from scratch. I am not going to get into the specific mechanics of that here. What I will say is that it was legal, it was deliberate, and it lasted until IAM was large enough that my actual name was an asset rather than a liability. The first 18 months were certifications, cold outreach, and contracts small enough that most people would have quit. I did not quit. I do not have that gear. Year 2, first federal engagement, a security vulnerability review for a regional transport authority, modest scope, serious credibility. Year 4, 3 government clients, 2 international projects, and a funding round from institutional investors who had done their due diligence and decided we were the real thing. Year 6, 140 people across 4 offices. Industry press was starting to use the phrase fastest growing firm in the sector without anyone paying them to. Year 7, Entrepreneur of the Year nomination. I followed VE Infrastructure's decline the same way you follow a weather system, not with emotion, just with attention. Year 2, post-departure, first supplier lawsuit filed publicly. Year 3, a tax authority audit open. Year 5, 2 former partners filed breach of contract claims citing payment irregularities neither of them could fully explain because the paperwork they had been given was not complete. Year 6, 4 major contracts lost. The company was running on emergency credit lines by then. I did nothing to accelerate any of it. I did not tip off creditors. I did not leak documents. A structurally fraudulent company carrying the kind of hidden weight does not need help collapsing. It needs time. That is all. I was in a client briefing on a Wednesday afternoon in Year 7 when my assistant forwarded me an email flagged as urgent. Sender Desa Crane, investigative correspondent at a major national financial publication I respected. Subject line, VE Infrastructure. I think you have a story I need to hear. 3 paragraphs. She had been investigating the company's collapse for 3 months. She had found financial irregularities that clearly predated Ribbon's leadership. She knew I had left abruptly 7 years ago, and she was direct about it. She thought she had most of the picture, but was missing the piece that explained why it had specifically been removed. She was not guessing. The way she described the document gaps told me she was closer than anyone outside of that building had any right to be. I read the email twice. Then I put my phone face down on the table and finished the briefing. I did not respond for 4 days. On the 4th day, I called Hadley Oren. Hadley is IAM's general counsel. She had been with me since Year 3 when the federal contract started requiring someone who could sit across from government procurement lawyers without flinching. She is precise, economical with words, and constitutionally incapable of telling me what I want to hear when what I need to hear is different. Those are the qualities I pay for. I read her the email over the phone without preface. When I finished, Hadley was quiet for a moment. 2 options, she said. Full non-engagement, cleanest, no exposure. You stay entirely outside the blast radius or controlled disclosure, measured risk, but you finally have a vehicle for getting an accurate record into the world. I asked her what she thought Desa was missing. The motive for your removal specifically. Hadley said she has found the fraud. Fraud explains the company's collapse. What it does not explain is why they needed to remove you the way they did with a fabricated narrative attached. That gap is the difference between a financial scandal story and the actual story. I told her I would think about it. I had already decided. I just wanted to hear the analysis first. We met 11 days later, neutral location, a private meeting room in a serviced office building not connected to IAM. Hadley sat to my left, recording running on both sides of the table, which Desa had agreed to in writing beforehand. I respect journalists who negotiate cleanly. I let Desa talk for the first hour. Her documentation was serious. She had the dual books, not the complete version I had, but enough of the structure to understand the architecture of the fraud. She had 2 former VE Infrastructure employees on record describing pressure to sign off on financial figures they knew were inaccurate. She had traced 3 of the Shell payment routes back to the general vicinity of Aldis's personal financial network, though she had not been able to close that loop completely yet. She had the timeline of the company's collapse mapped against public filings with a precision that told me she had spent real time on it. What she did not have was the dinner, the notepad, the pre-signed transfer agreement, the coaching operation. None of it. To her, I was the missing variable in a financial story. A former director whose abrupt departure correlated with an acceleration of the company's hidden liability. She had not yet understood that the financial fraud and what happened to me were the same story running on 2 parallel tracks. I reached into my briefcase and placed a USB drive on the table between us that contains the documents I copied the night I left 7 years ago. I had legitimate access to all of it. I slid a single printed page across to her. That is my written account of the evening that preceded my departure verbatim to the best of my recollection. She looked at the drive then at me. What do you want in exchange? Accuracy. I said that is the only thing I am asking for. I am not asking you to make me sympathetic. I am not asking you to protect IAM's reputation. We do not need protection. I am asking you to make sure the record reflects what actually happened because right now it does not. She picked up the drive. I added everything on there as verifiable. I would encourage you to verify all of it before you publish anything. She did 6 weeks of silence while she verified. I did not follow up once. Either she was a serious journalist or she was not. And following up would not change which one was true. We were wrapping up when she said it almost as an afterthought. The way people sometimes surface the most significant thing in a conversation right at its edge. One more thing, I have been pulling Riven's personal communications through a public records process tied to a civil suit. Something came up in that material I am still verifying. She closed her notebook. The abuse narrative, I do not think it was built alone. He had structured help. If what I am looking at holds up, there are text records and possibly audio. I will be in touch. She was gone before I could ask her to define structured help. 3 weeks passed without a word. Then a single text from her number at 11:46 on a Tuesday night. Found the coaching notes. There is a deleted recording, too, running final verification now. This is going to be significant. I read it once, set my phone down, and slept better that night than I had in years. The story ran on a Thursday, 6:00 a.m. online publication. Print edition hitting desks by mid-morning. I know the timestamp because Hadley forwarded me the link at 6:03 with a single line. It is everything. Read it when you can. I was already in the office. I read it at my desk with a coffee going cold beside me. The headline, The Vanishing Son. How a family dismantled a business and a person to outrun their own fraud. Desa had done something I had not fully anticipated. She had not written a financial scandal piece with a human interest angle bolted on. She had written a single unified story. The fraud and the fabricated narrative as one deliberate construction, each part serving the other. The financial irregularities required a scapegoat. The scapegoat required a story. The story required architecture. She showed all 3 layers with the same clinical precision she brought to our meeting. And she let the documents do the talking at every point where her own voice might have introduced editorializing. Section 1 walked through the fraud. Dual books, forged signatures, shell payment routing, misreported revenue across a multi-year window. My name appeared as a former co-director whose departure immediately preceded the most aggressive phase of the company's hidden liability accumulation. Factual, accurate, no overreach. Section 2 was Torvin Ash. I had not known his name until I read it in that article. Desa had found him through Riven's communication records, a specialist counselor who had for several years quietly marketed his services to clients seeking help articulating family trauma narratives. The text message thread between Torvin and Riven ran across 4 months. It was a production pipeline. Real memory sourced, reframed, emotionally repositioned, drilled for specific language, stress tested for credibility under scrutiny. One of Torvin's messages had been quoted in full. The key is specificity. Vague trauma reads as vague, specific trauma reads as truth. Section 3 was the recording recovered from a backup server during a separate professional misconduct complaint against Torvin, complaints that it turned out Desa had been tracking in parallel session audio. Riven's voice rehearsing the accusations with coached emotional calibration. Multiple takes adjustments between each one. The audio existed because Torvin recorded his sessions and because deleted files on a backed up server are never actually deleted. Desa published a transcript alongside the audio link. She did not need to describe what it sounded like. People could hear it themselves. I tracked the first 72 hours the way I track any project, with moving variables methodically without attachment to any single outcome. By end of day 1, 800,000 shares. National news networks had picked it up by Friday morning, most leading with the coaching audio because audio does something that documents alone do not. By Saturday, 4 separate journalists I had never spoken to had filed requests to speak with me. I declined all of them through Hadley. Riven's professional network moved fast, former associates publicly distancing themselves within 48 hours. The kind of coordinated retreat that tells you people had already been watching the situation and had their statements pre-drafted. Torvin Ash shuttered his practice by Monday. His professional registration body opened a formal review process by Wednesday. VE Infrastructure's 3 largest remaining creditors issued notices of formal default within the week. The company had been running on borrowed time for 2 years. The article did not cause the collapse. It just removed the last reason for anyone to extend patience. I watched all of this from my phone during a 2-day briefing with a European government delegation evaluating a 30 million security contract with E.ON. I was present, attentive, and entirely undistracted during every session. The calls coming in from numbers I recognized did not change that. Riven called 4 times across Thursday and Friday. Aldous called twice on Saturday. Aldous called again Sunday morning. My phone stayed face up on my desk and I watched their names appear and disappear without touching the screen. My assistant learned by day 2 to stop alerting me when those numbers came through. I was not avoiding them out of anger. I simply had nothing to say. Every possible version of that conversation ended in the same place. Me having given them something they had not earned. I was not prepared to do that. On the evening before the Entrepreneur of the Year ceremony, I was preparing remarks in my office when my assistant knocked and came in with an expression she was visibly working to keep neutral. A letter handwritten delivered to Iam's reception desk by courier. Return address Petra. I took it from her, held it. The envelope was sealed, formal. She had used good paper, the kind that signals effort. Whatever was inside had been composed carefully. I knew that before I opened it. I set it on the corner of my desk, and I left it there. I left the letter on my desk overnight. Not as a dramatic gesture, not because I was steeling myself or processing something. I left it because I had remarks to finish, a briefing document to review, and a 6:30 a.m. car to catch the following morning. The letter would keep. It had already kept for 7 years in one form or another. I slept without difficulty. The car picked me up on time. I reviewed my remarks during the drive. 4 minutes clean, professional, built around what it means to construct something structurally sound in an industry that rewards speed over integrity. No personal narrative, no triumph over adversity art. I had been asked twice by the awards committee if I wanted to share the story behind Iam's founding. I declined twice. The work was the story. Everything else was mine. I brought the letter in my briefcase. I do not know exactly why, not sentiment. I want to be clear about that. I think I brought it because leaving it on my desk felt like giving it more weight than it had earned, and carrying it felt like keeping it in its proper proportion. A document, one of many. The ceremony was held in a large industry venue. Full room, cameras, the kind of event where the lighting is designed to make everything feel more significant than it might otherwise. Iam had been nominated alongside 4 other firms, all of them legitimate operations I respected. When our name was announced, I stood, walked to the podium, shook the hand of the presenter, and delivered my 4 minutes. I talked about foundation work, about the parts of building something that nobody photographs, about the specific discipline of constructing systems that hold under pressure rather than systems that simply look good under inspection. The room was attentive. I was not performing for them. I was just saying true things in sequence, which is generally more effective than the alternative. When I walked off stage, I found a quiet corner backstage and opened the briefcase. Petra's handwriting is careful, always has been. She composes letters the way she runs a room with deliberate control over how each element lands. She apologized. She said they had been taken in by Riven's performance, that it had been convincing in the way that only something built over months of preparation could be convincing. She said fear about the company's future had made them reach for a simple explanation when the real one was more complicated and more damning of themselves. She acknowledged that what they did required a level of willful blindness she no longer knew how to justify. She said she knew it was not enough. She asked for an opportunity to explain in person. I read it twice, folded it along its original creases, placed it back in the envelope. I want to be honest, there was nothing in that letter I had not already understood. I had mapped their logic 7 years ago in an archive room at 2 a.m. Fear plus convenience plus a son who made a more compelling victim than the other one. I did not need Petra to explain the mechanism. I had reverse engineered it while it was still running. Back at the office the following morning, I put the letter in a fireproof locked box in my desk, the same one that holds incorporation documents, early contracts, and the drive copies from VE infrastructure. Filed, archived, closed. The fallout over the following 18 months was thorough and from a distance almost entirely predictable. VE infrastructure was formally liquidated. Riven filed for personal bankruptcy. The family home, the one Aldous had mortgaged against company debt in year 4 of the collapse, was claimed by creditors. Torvin Ash faced civil suits from 3 former clients who provided depositions describing how he had systematically reframed their personal disclosures for purposes that served his paying client rather than them. He settled 2 of the 3. The third went to judgment. Riven gave one interview to a small online outlet attempting to reframe everything as a family miscommunication that had been distorted by media coverage. The piece generated almost no engagement. When nobody is interested in your revision of events, that is its own verdict. About a year after the ceremony, a colleague who had been with Iam since year 2 asked me something over dinner directly, the way people ask things when they have been sitting on them for a while. He asked if I ever regretted walking out that night without defending myself. I thought about it, actually thought about it not as a deflection, but as a real question that deserved a real answer. No. I said the moment I started defending myself, I became a character in their story. When I walked out, I became the author of my own. My parents' numbers are still in my phone. I have not deleted them. I have not blocked them. Blocking implies ongoing effort to maintain distance, a continued active response to their existence. What I have instead is simple and permanent. I do not answer, not out of anger, which would require sustained energy directed at them, not out of strategy because there is nothing left to gain or protect. Just silence, clean, proportionate, and entirely mine. They built a story where I was the monster so they could outrun what they had actually done. They needed me loud, reactive, and present to make that story hold. I gave them nothing to hold. For people who expected to be confronted, who needed the confrontation to feel like the story had an ending, permanent silence from the person they wronged is the only punishment that does not expire. They are still waiting for a call that is not coming. That is enough. Kaylin Vey, thank you so much for watching until the end. If you really like our videos, Please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Have a great day.